So we'll call this special meeting to order on October 7th at 7:30 p.m. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Mr. Taylor, would you like to give the opening prayer, please?
Dear Lord, allow us to have a very informative meeting this evening, a very respectful meeting this evening, and hopefully everybody can be respectful in terms of the time frame so we can get through this and be fully informed. So in your name we pray. Amen.
Clerk, call the roll.
Mr. Lawson?
Here.
Mr. Booth? Mr. Clement?
Here.
Ms. Sonic? Here. Mr. Dumpy? Mr. Flowers? Mr. Taylor?
Here.
Mr. Booth and Mr. Dumpy will be here, but they're running a little late.
Looks like Mr. Booth just pulled in.
Okay. So I would like to ask the city attorney to give a brief summary of the ground rules for this meeting.
So I've been instructed by council. So the agenda, as I recall, placed the public comment time first to give members of the public 3 minutes per person per the rules of council. My understanding is there was a request for RSVPs for because this is a special meeting. Only one person, is my understanding, did RSVP. So if there is any extension of that 3 minute time or additional comment from other persons, there would have to be motions adopted by council to permit that. And then following that, so because I understand 3 minutes is not an extensive period of time, whatever any individual during the public comment wants to say, they're allowed to say. If there's a question, it'll just have to be reserved for the appropriate official or council towards the end of the meeting to answer the question.
If being a public person, how do I know if I have anything to comment about it if I don't know why we're having a meeting? Am I missing something?
No, the point of the meeting is to answer questions. So if we don't know what the questions are, we can't get the answers.
So let's start. Did we have,
Well,
or
actually, go ahead. So there's still going to be another meeting next Monday. So if there's something that elicits a question, then that can always be addressed or raised at the meeting a week from today.
This meeting tonight is to address your questions about the charter, and wanting to abolish the charter. That's all this meeting pertains to tonight. It's if you have any questions, and it's to inform you of by Mr. Jonathan here as what it means if we keep the charter or if we abolish the charter. But the thing is any questions that you might have is what we're asking for. That's what it's about.
Thank you.
okay, so did we have any RSVPs?
We have one.
One?
Mr. Brooks.
Mr. Brooks? Okay. Mr. Brooks, if you'd like to step to the podium, please.
I think I got the rules down, but we'll see. Stuart Brooks, 123 East Columbus Street. I guess I'm here for 3 or 4 different questions. Maybe we can answer them next Monday, maybe. My first question is that as with the board of elections, and we had to go through 3 different separate, I think, notifications to click on the board. without this, being a mayoral, council or going back to the charter as we are now. My question is what was the cost, for the county board of elections when we had to go back and put this, bring the paperwork back, reprint, and go forward to be able to put it on the ballot? I'd like to know what that original cost is. With that cost, it would be attorney fees and new ballots to be printed and whatever else we would occur. So I'd like to know, not tonight, but if somebody could address, the public. It seems like to me that the public went out and got the petition signed, got them down to the Board of Election. Wanted it, and it was legal to put this on the ballot. And as the third time we went down, we got, through the Board of Elections or from a judge that we had to either do that or we would be fined or so on and so forth. But I'd like to know what it cost us additionally going forward. So if that could be answered next Monday, I'd appreciate it. My second question is we haven't heard, I know I'm being a little funny, but there used to be a show on one time that was, I won't even go there. I'd like to know where we stand with our city manager who is on leave right now, where we are in regards to going forward. Are we looking to bring him back? Is he going to be reprimanded? Are we going to let him go? Where are we with that situation today? I think you're playing into what the citizens seem to be kind of wanting, going back to the mayor, because we, as citizens, we haven't been told anything. We're sitting here running a pretty sizable $6 million company, if you want to call it. We don't have a CEO. We don't have somebody calling the daily, every day, that goes on in a city or any other business. But the citizens I've spoke to over the last month would like to know where we are in that particular arena right now. What are we doing? What's our plans, and so on and so forth. And it seems to make a pretty good statement as we go further into this election. I don't think, my opinion is that we haven't been very clear to the citizens of Nelsonville of what we are going to do with the city manager who's somebody's making $80,000 plus and not working. That's my second one. My third is, where are we at with Mr. Hunter? Which there is a lawsuit that's floating around, which is a sizable lawsuit. I've heard a lot of different scenarios that, we were going to, there was going to be some type of a discount and Mr. Hunter would, we would settle that case. And I heard we did not go forward with that. Now the full amount is on the table. So I think the citizens like to know this is somewhere in the $200,000 range, this lawsuit, that's a sizable amount of money. So where are we going forward with that particular lawsuit? So I just think we need to be a little more transparent with the people of Nelsonville. And that is, transparent means where are we with the three things I've asked. So I'm just asking council that Monday, if we could address these three that I've asked, and if it's so that where we stand with the three questions I've asked city council. Anybody have any questions for me?
I believe we could have some answers for the regular council meeting on the 14th.
That'd be fine.
Okay. So I don't think we're prepared unless you have an additional comment.
I can briefly address preliminarily the Board of Elections. So I don't know if there is any cost that will be assessed to the city.
Okay.
And if there is, what it will be, I don't know. I did pose that question to them. I'm waiting to hear an answer.
Okay.
What I was told, though, by the Board of Elections is the day that they were reprogramming their ballot machines to include the charter initiative happened to be the same day their service guy was coming in for another unrelated visit. So I took from that that the Board of Elections incurred no additional charges, but I'm just waiting to hear that officially. So I apologize for not
Oh,
having
that's
it.
fine. That's news to everybody, but that's fine. That's great.
If I have any other update, I can report on next Monday.
Okay, I appreciate that.
But I did put the question in.
All right. That's all I have.
Thank you.
So now we'll make a motion to open other comments.
I'll make that motion.
Okay, go ahead.
I motion that we open the floor for additional or questions or comments if there are any.
One second.
Mr. Clement,
Yes.
Ms. Sonic,
Yes.
Mr. Booth,
Yes.
Mr. Taylor.
Yeah.
Mr. Lawson.
Yes.
Okay, so are there any citizens that would like to make comments further? Please step to the podium.
I'm Alex Ross, 763 Poplar Street. I want to comment on executive session. First of all, you have very few members of the Nelsonville public, not even a fraction of a percent, who comes to these meetings. And when you adjourn for a solid hour, you can expect, I'm not willing to sit and cool my heels for an hour while you are hiring or firing, whatever you're doing in there, which is not transparent. But I think they're very dangerous. You've had resignations in front of the public. You're constrained to be polite and not get into public fights, but people resign as a result of these executive sessions, and then they rescind their resignations. So I think it's very dangerous for the council. This may be a moot issue if the form of government changes, but if you must have an executive session, I wish you would have it at the very end. And are we ever to know the results of that executive session? I am not willing to cool my heels here for an hour. I have other things to do. Thanks.
Thank you. Any other comments? Okay.
Yes, my name is Gary Grant. I live at 105 Fayette Street. Now, they said this meeting is about the mayor form of government, the charter, you know. So what I'm asking is, from all the newspaper articles I've read so far, from WOUB to the Messenger, to other news articles, this is on the charter, right? Am I right? This is on, I mean, this is on the ballot for the public to vote, to choose.
Correct.
Okay, that's what I wanted to know. And my last comment is, it's up to the citizens of Nelsonville, whether we should have a charter form of government or a mayor. And my own opinion is, I think we need a mayor because the charter is not working.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Any other comments? Okay, we'll close that part of the meeting. Moving on, Mr. Rowe, would you like to go first on a report or
Mr. Sappington.
or Mr. Sappington? Mr. Sappington, are you live with us?
I am here.
Okay, the floor is yours.
All righty, thank you. Actually, I'm getting a lot of feedback. Would you guys mind muting me while I talk? I think that way I'm not getting an echo. Okay, perfect. So, thank you to any residents, the residents in attendance, the city council, acting manager, and of course, anybody watching at home. I am happy to provide, first, apologies, I could not be here in person due to several ongoing family health issues and would be happy to be here. But this will have to suffice for now. So I'm happy to provide a small brief report on the subject matter at hand as requested by council on specifically how the charter language could impact not just the city, but how I view it in my role as fiscal officer and the fiscal officer with the fiduciary duty to report on the impact of the taxpayer. So I wanted to say a couple things. So one of the things I hope the council considers, I hope some of the public consider in this question, and I've discussed more than once with both city officials and the law director and others, is the impact on the census recount from a few years ago. So the census recount in the name of and for the city of Nelsonville under the charter form of government and under the charter itself, to effectively abolish the city government and reinstitute it. There is frankly zero precedent in the state of Ohio, not just for the census recount that we successfully pulled off, but also for how that census recount impacts after a charter abolishment. And so if a voter asks the question of any of us, what is the impact of my vote for abolishment of the charter on the census recount, the status of the city, and the other impacts that that recount successfully imparted to the city? There's frankly nobody in the state of Ohio who can answer that question, and if they answer it, they're not being honest with you, or frankly, they're spinning it for their own agenda. And so the reason I say that is because a fiscal officer with the fiduciary duty to report on risks to the city taxpayer and to the taxpayer's money, specifically the city's money, I have a requirement, a legal requirement, to express concern that and for honoring the impacts we received from that successful census challenge. There could be uncertainty both in the in-between period and after, should the abolishment pass, on the impact of several things. The first is union employees. If the city is revoking its city status, which is protected in the language of the charter under Article 1 of the charter, if the city revokes that city distinction and that government existence, which the city has a right to do, it's not clear to me if the union contracts can survive. So the state of Ohio, a city that loses its city status to village, automatically, it's in the revised code, automatically loses its collective bargaining agreements as well as its union protections. For employees, that was a big thing we talked about in the census recount, many folks may remember. And it's something that we have to at least consider that could be an impact here today. There are, of course, also funding impacts for being a village and city that we've gone over ad nauseum for several censuses now. But I just really want to say that there's no precedent for what the city of Nelsonville did in challenging that census in the way we did. And there's even smaller, and in fact, there's less than zero, if there's a way to say that. There's even fewer answers because now there is precedent. Nelsonville did it, but there's even fewer answers on the abolishment of the city government in the midst of that period where the census was challenged. And frankly, like I said, nobody has the answer, including myself, as to how those impacts would play out. And if somebody is saying they know, they're not being honest. That's a risk to both the taxpayer and the tax dollars, as well as city employees. And I think it is important to mention tonight. Two, I also wanted to mention that there's a lot of folks who talk about the charter, and the conversation sometimes has become unmoored from the original intent of the charter. And the reason I want to bring this up And I speak as a former council person who was the only council person to introduce amending and abolishing language to the charter as a council person. And those votes lost 1-6, including some members who are pushing charter abolishment now, who at the time were against it. The charter came about because the city had entered a period of fiscal emergency, and citizens, business leaders, and stakeholders alike had come together to try and craft a document that would set the city up for financial success in the future. It was never meant to be a permanent state of affairs. It was meant to be amended, and there has been no, actually there's been one small amendment, but there's been no regular charter review since its creation. And I think it's important to note that under the statutory form of government, the city of Nelsonville bounced a check here to a local business, and that was the day that the city discovered that it was broke and in fiscal emergency back in the 1990s. And to simplifying some, granted, I was 3 years old when it happened, so forgive me for paraphrasing, but I think it's important to mention that fiscal disaster was why the charter was brought to bear and why the voters approved it originally. And those are things that a fiscal officer has to meet their fiduciary duty to the voters and the taxpayer. And so that's why I mention it here tonight. I don't think that the city is in the same circumstances today, but I will to the union contracts without the auditor's review, with raises and different things that have a very high cost. There are incoming budget constraints in the years of 2025 through the years 2027 that though the sky is not falling, I suggest to the council to at least consider that there will need to be a flexibility and a sort of lean attitude, a willingness to be creative and innovative, to go through those issues in a way that in a better way than nearby cities and villages have experienced themselves. And I cannot imagine that a city government can be both innovative and lean and agile while in the midst of abolishing itself and remaking itself. And so I have to also express concern that it concerns me that the city itself, capital C, as well as the community, small lowercase c for city, both sides of the city, as it were, will be left both distracted and unprepared if we undergo something that, frankly, as I understand it, very few to almost no cities or villages have done in the state of Ohio in its history. That concerns me that will leave us unprepared to have the serious conversations about budget constraints due to rising costs, costs rising faster than revenue. Currently, those are very much can take on. And assuming we make the choices and we are serious about the conversations that go on, but should the charter be abolished in 2024 and then a new city government be reinstituted in January 2026, it gives me very serious concern about what, if anything, the council or the administration, including myself, can do in the year and a half in between to take on these financial issues and really serve the taxpayer so that they don't lose services, as well as serve the city employees who work hard for the city. I think those are valid concerns. They may not be the most pressing, but as the fiscal officer, I wanted to make sure they were mentioned in this room. And I promise I'm rounding the final corner. I did want to bring back, before I turn it over to you guys, to the original language of the charter, which is to say the preamble, because I think we have a lot of conversation about what works and doesn't work in city government. And frankly, having been a council person for 4 years and a city auditor for the same city government for 5 years now, I can say that after 9 years, I've seen a lot of things that work and a lot of things that do not work. And that's a good conversation to have when we're talking about whether the voters are going to choose up or down on the current form of government, I think it's important to get back to, okay, so what are we actually talking about? And so I'll just read to back up my points about the census, the current status of the government, and how abolishing those things could have impacts, as well as impacts on the finances. I'll just read, it's a very quick preamble. We, the people of the city of Nelsonville, in order to obtain and secure the benefits of home rule powers under the Constitution of the state of Ohio, do hereby adopt this charter for the government of the city of Nelsonville. Through this charter, with divine guidance, we express our beliefs and convey our trust so that its concepts shall long endure without regard to age, race, color, sex, marital status, handicap, religion, ancestry, or national origin. The very next section says the city shall be known as the city of Nelsonville. It shall continue under this charter to be the body politic and corporate, and this is an important sentence, and as such shall have perpetual succession. In other words, the charter was meant in a way I didn't appreciate when I first got on council, was meant to express both the home rule powers, as in Nelsonville can rule Nelsonville and not Ohio, meaning Ohio doesn't rule Nelsonville, Nelsonville does. And through divine guidance and express our beliefs and convey their trust that these concepts shall long endure and such shall have perpetual success. I didn't understand that when I was first on council, and I think I appreciate it better. That I will just end with is that council had asked, well, let me rephrase this. So since council has asked me to report on these different things, and I've covered a few things from the taxpayer impacts, the census impacts, the union employees impacts, the fiscal emergency that brought the charter, I think it's important that we discuss why it's here and talk about the issue actually at hand, which is the question, shall it be abolished now? That is what is on voters' ballots, is what will be on my ballot. And frankly, as a citizen, it's under these considerations of why I oppose this effort.
Okay. Any council questions for Mr. Sappington? Okay. Mr. Rowe, the floor is yours.
Tonight, am I sit down? I can't speak.
I'm sorry.
So, Mr. Tolliver's circulating the handy dandy chart. This is a chart from one of the leading legal treatises in Ohio on local government law. So the first side is just kind of the explanation of the symbols. If you turn to the back, that gives a handy dandy chart describing the general statutory plan of government. Just to kind of, I find it's helpful when we're talking about abolishing the charter and possibly going to the statutory form of government, just to visualize what that would look like. So obviously this chart just kind of gives the general structure of the general statutory plan, which provides for an elected mayor. I'll get back to this chart a little bit later, but I just wanted to give everybody a chance to kind of look and digest that chart. You can of course take it home with you. The first point that I would observe is under the Ohio Constitution. So this is a constitutionally guaranteed right. It's not an inherent right. It's just a constitutional right for the people of a municipality to choose their own form of government lawfully. It's not the city attorney's decision. It's not the city government's decision. It's not anybody in City Hall's decision. It's the people's decision. It's important to keep in mind. The city does have an obligation to the people to ensure that the choice is exercised lawfully. Again, because it's a constitutional right rather than an inherent right, it is important, it is critical that the proper procedure, et cetera, is followed to lawfully exercise their rights. Now, when we're talking about charter versus the statutory form of government, we're talking about, and you've probably already, long heard the term home rule. And that's defined as the authority to exercise all powers of local self-government, subject only to the limitations set forth in the Constitution. That would be both the Ohio Constitution and the United States Constitution. And that includes the choice of the form of government to carry out those powers. That's what home rule is. Now, there are two aspects of home rule, and I think it's helpful to kind of break it down into these two. There's what I call substantive home rule. Substantive home rule is referring to the exercise of the powers of local self-government relating to internal affairs and regulations. A municipality possesses substantive home rule under both the charter and the statutory form of government. Whether it's charter or statutory form doesn't make any difference. So whether council will pass rules, for example, the speed limit on Canal Street, regardless of whether it's under the charter or under the statute, council has that authority, at the legislative authority of the city. Again, substantive home rule applies regardless of statutory form or charter. But there's a second aspect to home rule, and that's what I call procedural or structural home rule. And that is referring to the process and structure by which the municipality, the city, exercises its substantive home rule. Only municipalities that have charters possess procedural structural rules. The flip side of this is to say a statutory city only has home rule with respect to substantive regulation, internal affairs legislation. It does not have any authority to modify the statutorily mandated procedures and structures. And I'll give some examples in a little bit. So that's in that sense, when a city operates under a statutory form of government, the statute actually operates as its charter. So, and the reason for that is because it's written by the General Assembly in Columbus about the structure and procedures that the municipality in its statutory form of government has to follow. So it's kind of helpful to think of, it's not so much between a charter and the statute as whether the charter is the charter or the state statute is the charter. And of course, there are pros and cons with either the charter or the statutory form of government. Again, referring back to the right of the people to choose, it's the people and only the people who get to exercise that right as to determining the proper form. So it's the people and only the people who get to choose and determine the correct balance of the interests and choices given the pros and cons of the charter versus the statutory form of government. So the ballot measure that's presented is whether to abolish or retain the charter. It's technically not whether to have a city manager or a mayor. Although the general statutory form of government refers to a mayor and has an elected mayor, there are three optional statutory forms of government, one of which has a city manager. So it's not a question of whether to have a mayor or a city manager. The ballot question is whether to have a charter or not. And you can't keep part of the charter and get rid of the rest of it with this. It's either keep the charter entirely or get rid of the charter entirely. The reason I raise that point is it will continue to be something that will impact, and the people will have to continue to make a decision in the years to come if the charter is abolished, whether to actually keep the general statutory plan or adopt one of the optional statutory plans. Similarly, under a charter, I know the charter as it exists today has a city manager, but that's not the only form of government that you can have under a charter. there are city charters where there is an elected mayor. As far as I'm aware, there are no charters in the state of Ohio that have the commission form of government, but that is one of the statutory options. Whether or not, so I guess what I'm suggesting is whether or not there actually is a city manager won't be decided by the measure this fall. That may be something that will have to be revisited by the voters prior to the statutory form of government becoming into effect. There are a number of structural, remember when I was talking about procedural, structural, home rule, there are a number of structural differences between the statutory form of government and the current charter form. I would refer folks to that. There was a, sorry, I just love the term handy dandy. There was a handy dandy chart in the Athens County Independence story on the ballot measure that laid forth changes comparing the charter, the current charter form to the statutory form. I thought that chart was quite helpful. I would refer folks to that story and that chart. But there's one addition that I would point out that the chart misses. There would be an additional elected executive officer, and that would be the city council president under the statutory form of government. The city council president is not the mayor. It's not a member of council. It's an executive officer separately elected who presides over council but has no vote except in case of time. And of course, the mayor, the elected mayor would have, under the statutory form, would have veto powers. But there is that, it's important to keep in mind that whereas under the statute, council would be split up, there would be 4 wards and then 3 members elected at large, there would still be the separate elected city council president. Initially, the terms of both the city council members under the statutory form and the city council president under the statutory form, their terms would be for 2 years unless the voters approve by separate ballot measure, increasing that term to 4 years. So again, I guess what I just want to make sure that people understand, it's not just a one-time ballot measure vote one way or the other. It could wind up being a series of measures that have to be passed because only the people have that authority to establish their form of government. In other words, it's not pass it in November. If it passes, then, it's just council's work to do for the next year. There are just some things the law does not permit council to do to determine the appropriate structural balance to take. There are also procedural differences between the statutory form of government and the current charter form of government. I think the former city attorney several years ago put it quite well when he described the statutory form of government as very constrained. And I think what he meant by that was under the statutory form of government, the people of Nelsonville aren't the ones setting the rules. It's the General Assembly in Columbus that are setting the rules. Sometimes having externally imposed rules is good, but there is that sacrifice of flexibility. Again, recall when I was saying there are pros and cons to both forms. It's important to keep that in mind. And that's particularly salient when it comes to procedural differences. So for example, under the charter, there are 2 readings that are required to pass a ordinance under regular order. Under the statutory form of government, it requires 3 readings under regular order. And in fact, resolutions require 3 readings under regular order, unlike the 1 reading under the charter. There are also strict rules under the statute for publication of legislation. If you don't meet those strict requirements, the ordinance, even though it was duly adopted, even though the ordinance was duly adopted, if it's not published and posted according to statute is unenforceable. And the lack of proper publication is a full and complete defense against enforcement of the ordinance. Another, this is both perhaps kind of a structural and procedural difference. Under the statutory form of government, because the mayor, as you see from the handy dandy chart I passed out, the mayor is the one over all of the various department heads, and that includes authority to hire and fire, subject really only to the civil service regulations. So under the statutory form of government, I think the civil service regulations have a heightened importance. Of course, those are passed by and adopted by and enacted by council, but the civil service regulations would have an increased salience under a more mayoral, under the general statutory of government. I think that's the main points that I just wanted to hit, but of course, if council has any questions, I can answer them.
Does anyone have any questions for Mr. Rowe?
So to be clear, this does pass, council would stay on and work until
So
2025.
if it passes, yes. Now, exactly what that looks like, we'd be a little bit in uncharted territory. I can say if it passes the year, but let me back up. If it passes before the transition is completed, that transition period is going to require a massive, massive amount of work by council. It's going to require going through every single ordinance that's ever been passed. It's going to require going through systematically the code of ordinances. I do have a concern that the legal cost to the city will dramatically increase. And again, whether or not, that's not a pro or con against the ballot measure. It's just, I just want to alert council to that possibility. Basically, the transition period will be very tedious at times and very important. I mean, one obvious item of legislation that's never had to be dealt with before, but would have to establish the salary of the mayor by law. There's no contract with the mayor, unlike the city manager. So council would have to figure out what would be the appropriate salary for the mayor. You'd have to go back. I think Mr. Sappington mentioned the collective bargaining agreements. That would be a very tricky and delicate situation because you don't want to do anything that would be construed as violating any of those agreements. But yet there'd just be a lot of work that would just need to be done.
A mayor cannot be fired, is that correct?
I don't believe under the statutory form of government there's any provision for a recall.
Recall.
A city manager can be fired, so there's a big difference there. The council can do that.
So basically, the way I understand now, with them wanting to abolish the charter, basically, we take from governing ourselves as a city of Nelson, citizens of Nelsonville, to following the guidelines of the state. Unless we adopt some other type of charter.
Correct. I guess the way I would put it is, not having a charter necessarily includes a giving up of the procedural structural rights of home rule. Okay, that's how I would put it.
But basically, the state has more authority over us.
Yes.
If we go and abolish the charter than what we have right now.
So under the state statute, because that's a creature of the General Assembly, the General Assembly can make changes both to the procedural and structural aspects of local government without any notice to us, without asking for any input. They would just, in fact, they did that last year. It was effective of October of last year, the General Assembly changed, in a positive way, I should say, changed remember when I was talking about the publication posting requirements for ordinances? They changed the law that it used to be, you would just post it in 5 or 6 places in town or in the newspaper, and that counted as publication. They changed it, you now have to, if you don't put it in the newspaper, you have to post it on the city's website and social media page, both. If not, it's an unenforceable ordinance. Now, I tend to agree with that change just because increasingly that's how people get information quickly, is either like through the Facebook page or the website. But the problem was there are some villages, in fact, some that I have represented, who weren't even aware of the change until months after it happened. And they didn't even have a website or a Facebook page, so then they're scrambling to pay for that. And so I guess, forgive me for criticizing the General Assembly, but I think the General Assembly, even though I'm in favor of that particular change, I think the General Assembly could have done a much better job of advertising that change to all the villages and cities across the state. That just illustrates how the General Assembly can make a change. They don't have an obligation to notify us. We'd have to pay extra close attention to the bills that are going before the General Assembly that might impact local government.
With the way I understand it now, we can still maintain the charter and go to an elected mayor, vice the city manager, if the citizens don't, say get rid of the charter.
That is, oh, sorry.
But if they say get rid of the charter, then that's where we fall back. But basically, where the state legislature can change the rules on it.
Right, so under the charter, if the voters choose to keep the charter, and again, this is exclusively the right of the people. The right of the people includes the right to amend the charter, which they could amend it to a mayor. If the charter is amended to a mayoral system, then the charter describes the powers and duties of the mayor rather than the statute.
And then the way I understand it, the way this is set up on the ballot right now is to do away with the charter completely. Not change the mayor, not become mayor, not get rid of the city manager, but it's getting rid of the Nelsonville City Charter completely.
Correct. That's the only thing the ballot measure is doing is abolishing or retaining the charter. That's it.
Right. So that, and like you say, with us abolishing the charter, the citizens of Nelsonville basically have less say of how they're governed than unless we go back to and adopt the charter again. Because the state legislator can dictate our rules to where we as a charter govern ourselves.
Yeah, so abolishing the charter means the people are choosing to default to the General Assembly's mandate.
Right, and fall under the rule of the state, basically. Whatever the General Assembly comes up with.
Yes.
Instead of us choosing our own form of government, we fall under what the state, basically the General Assembly dictates for us to do.
Correct, under one of the 4
Right,
statutory options.
right, that's what I was thinking.
Mr. Rowe,
Yes.
I've got some questions. So I know we have some ongoing litigation still pertaining to this, issue. So I'm not sure what all we can say, but I do personally want to just say that, like, no one on council, including Mr. Flowers, who's not here this evening, has stated that we were opposed to allowing citizens to choose their own form of government. That's actually, that's just a fact. None of us opposed that. There were some technical issues. I don't know how much we can say about this, but there are some technical issues in how it was filed. And if I may, from our last meeting, when we went into executive, we discussed between Mr. Spiker and Mr. Rowe that you guys reached out to their attorneys and you were actually helping them to fix those technicalities, to file it, to get it properly on the ballot. Is that true?
That is true.
And they refused that help?
That is true.
Okay. And so what happens if the technicalities, if this passes on the ballot and the technicalities, that we were arguing there were about getting it on the ballot, what if the court sides with us? What will happen with that ballot issue?
it is conceivable the courts could declare it invalid. I actually have a pretty deep concern about that possibility, just to be transparent to the people. Since July, I've been in contact with the Attorney General's office. Because I wanted to forego the possibility of just the confusion that a post-election invalidation of the ballot measure by a court would cause. So I know the Attorney General has been paying attention to this, and in fact, at one point, they had expressed interest in getting involved in the lawsuit directly, but obviously it kind of sped up a little quicker than they were, they only have so much manpower. I'm a little baffled, frankly, at the language that was added by the Secretary of State, apparently, to the ballot question, where if you look at it, it's the last sentence, the actual question, and it asks, I'm not quoting verbatim, but it's should the proposed ordinance abolishing the charter be approved? And of course, an ordinance can't abolish the charter. And my concern is there is a possibility that the state might file a post-election lawsuit to invalidate. And there's nothing the city can't stop the state from doing that. There is a real possibility of that happening. I would far rather it not happen. I'd far rather just whatever the results of the election are, the results are. It's just the particular language of the charter raises validity issues.
Had it ever been discussed with the committee about actually making a charter amendment in their initiative?
I do not know.
Okay. Is Mr. Sappington still on the phone?
Taylor, you still here?
I'm here. Sure.
So Taylor, you mentioned in, not necessarily this year or next year, but the coming years, if this ballot initiative were to pass, you talked a lot of auditor speak in terms of the finances of the city, but is that basically, in short, you're saying there would probably be cutbacks within the city?
So I think, I think that because of the decisions that lie before us already, or maybe I should say the reality that lies before us already, I think it's reasonable to be concerned and to express to the council tonight, as well as in future weeks and should the initiative pass, potentially months and longer, the concern that the amount of risk to the finances increases when there's the possibility that there will be great distraction and upheaval. And I do think that the abolishment of a city form of government and the reinstituting of it in just a few mere months, what would that be, 13 months or 14 months, I do have concern about if will I spend 2025. Any fiscal officer would worry about this. This is why I tried to focus on the fiduciary responsibilities I have to this conversation. Any fiscal officer would wonder how loud and how hard can I bang the drum next year during this upheaval and abolishment about coming financial shortfalls. And will it go on deaf ears? Will there even be ears to hear it? Because the council will be trying to reinstitute the entire city code and abolishing the previous form of government, and having new elections for all the office holders, as well as the great concern, which I think was implied in the previous report here, about validity of the things passed in the meantime. At the same time, we could be losing our collective bargaining agreements and their unions. The short version is that I can't imagine the solution to our fiscal questions in the coming 3 to 5 years, or 1 to 5 years is maybe a fair assessment, it's more chaos. And chaos is risky. And I have a legal responsibility to express risk to the council. So I'm sorry, that was a lot of auditor speak, but that's my way of saying, it does sound like it introduces a substantial amount of risk. And to date, nobody seems to have been able to answer how the city can abate those risks. And I think that's a question that's worth discussing.
So Taylor, correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't the water and sewer departments, isn't the majority of their wages paid out of those funds?
Yes, water and sewer folks, majority of wages are paid out of the water and sewer funds. Yes.
So I would say probably what we're looking at, in all honesty, just cut to the brass tacks, is be amongst all the chaos and the rewriting and the hundreds of thousands of dollars it'll cost to do it. We'll probably end up not having a fire department or a police department. If you really want to cut it down, you laugh as you will, but it will probably be that.
Never have.
It'll be a volunteer fire.
It'll be a volunteer fire department, and the police and the sheriff's office will be contracted to come in and police the town. Excuse me, I'm speaking. But that is exactly what will happen. So you can make your choice, plain and simple. Do I agree with everything that has happened in the past? No, I don't. I think there's been a lot of chaos and a lot of mayhem. But I think if you look at the root of the problem, all the way down to the root of it, for 26 years or more, the charter, there was a gentleman who beat you down with the charter, who used it to his advantage constantly, never stopping. Now that he's not there, he wants to get rid of it. Why? Ask yourself why. Really get to the heart. Guys, this last election was made personal. Made personal. It was personal attacks like unepic proportion. The Nelsonville bad old boys, the Nelsonville good old boys, how they couldn't decide what they were going to call us. And it drew lines through people who were supposedly friends. Over what? Over what? Chaos and mayhem. And that's all it's going to continue, is chaos and mayhem, until you finally wake up and realize what's really being said and what's true and what's false. That's what the problem is.
Mr. Rhodes?
I'm sorry, citizen comments are over. We will have 2 meetings before the election. So if you have further comments, you can come to those meetings.
All right.
But right now, this is council discussion. Thank you. So to go on to that, I'm sure this meeting and these questions have raised more questions. And again, we have 2 more meetings before the election in November. So we can take those questions and try and address them the best we can. And I will say, at the height of this meeting so far, 31 people have been watching the live stream. So obviously there's a lot of interest in this. And I just hope that people stay with the facts of what this is about. So, Mr. Rowe, do you have anything else?
No, other than just reiterating, it is the people's choice to be exercised lawfully.
Okay. Mr. Sappington, do you have anything to add?
No, sir, actually. Well, maybe I'll just reiterate what Mr. Rhodes said, that the city of Nelsonville, the people decide the government in the end. And I support that in democracy, and I appreciate the chance to just report on some of the aspects and question marks.
Is there any other further council questions or comments? With that, I make a motion to adjourn at 8:33.
I'll second that.
Mr. Wilson?
Yes.
Mr. Clement?
Yes.
Ms. Sonic?
Yes.
Mr. Duffy?
Yes.
Mr. Booth?
Yes.
Yes.